If sarcasm was an Olympic sport, my marriage would have taken the gold medal, the endorsement deals, and probably a Netflix documentary about how spectacularly it crashed and burned. My name's Pete Hollander, and I've spent the last 15 years thinking I knew my wife Dana better than the back of my grease-stained hands. Turns out I knew jack crap. I should have seen it coming when she started working late at Meridian Financial, her HR executive job suddenly requiring emergency meetings at 9 p.m. on Saturdays. Or when she bought that red dress that cost more than my monthly insurance payment and claimed it was for team-building exercises. But hey, I'm just a guy who fixes engines for a living. What do I know about the subtle art of marital deception? Pete, you smell like motor oil again, Dana said last Tuesday, wrinkling her nose like I'd rolled around in a septic tank. She was standing in our kitchen wearing a silk blouse that probably cost more than most people's rent, checking her phone with the intensity of a surgeon reading x-rays. It's called having a job, sweetheart, I replied, grabbing a beer from the fridge. You know, that thing where you exchange labor for money? Ancient concept, I realize. She didn't laugh. Dana used to laugh at my jokes, back when we were young and stupid and thought love could survive anything, including my tendency to find humor in the darkest corners of life. Now she just looked at me like I was a stain on her designer furniture. The real wake-up call came when my best friend Tony showed up at Hollander's Auto Repair with a look on his face like someone had kicked his dog. Tony's been my business partner and drinking buddy since high school, the kind of guy who'd help you bury a body and never ask questions, though hopefully it never comes to that. Pete, we need to talk, he said, his usual wisecracking demeanor nowhere to be found. Sounds ominous. Did you crash another customer's car? Because I swear, if you totaled Mrs. Patterson's Buick again, it's about Dana. The wrench in my hand suddenly felt like it weighed 50 pounds. What about Dana? Tony pulled out his phone, fingers hesitating over the screen like he was defusing a bomb. I was at Murphy's Tavern last night. You know, the fancy place downtown where they charge $15 for a burger? The one where Dana said she was having dinner with her sister? Yeah, well, unless her sister grew a beard and started going by Victor, she wasn't there with family. He showed me the photo, and my world tilted sideways like a car with two flat tires. There was my wife, my Dana, sitting on some guy's lap like she was auditioning for a music video. The guy was tall, dark-haired, and wearing the kind of expensive suit that screamed, "I sell overpriced cars to people with more money than sense." His hands were on her waist, and she was laughing at something he'd whispered in her ear. The laugh that used to be mine. "Who's the suit?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Victor DeSantis. Owns that luxury car dealership on 5th Street. You know, the one with the Porsches in the window that cost more than your house." I stared at the photo until the image burned into my retinas. Dana looked happy, genuinely happy, in a way I hadn't seen in months, maybe years. The realization hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. "How long?" I asked. "I don't know, man, but judging by how comfortable they looked." Tony shrugged, the gesture heavy with implication. I handed the phone back and picked up my wrench, focusing on the engine in front of me like it held the secrets of the universe. A 2018 Honda Civic with a timing belt issue. Simple problem, simple solution. Unlike my marriage, which apparently had more problems than a 20-year-old Ford with 200,000 miles. "You okay?" Tony asked. "Peachy," I said, tightening a bolt with perhaps more force than necessary. "Just figuring out how to fix something that's been broken for a while." That night, I sat in my living room with a beer and waited for Dana to come home. She walked in at 11:30, humming some song I didn't recognize, her cheeks flushed and her hair slightly messed up despite her obvious attempts to fix it. "How was dinner with your sister?" I asked from the couch. She froze for just a second, but recovered quickly. "Fine, you know how Sarah gets when she's had too much wine." Talked my ear off about her divorce proceedings. "Funny thing about Sarah," I said, taking a long pull from my beer. "I called her around 9 to ask if you wanted me to pick you up. She said she hadn't seen you in 2 weeks. Dana's face went through a series of expressions like a slot machine before landing on indignant anger. "Are you checking up on me now? What are we, in high school? Just looking out for my wife? You know, making sure she's safe when she's out with mysterious bearded men who look suspiciously like luxury car dealers." The color drained from her face, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "I can explain," she started. "I'm sure you can," I said, standing up and heading for the stairs, "but I'm guessing it'll be about as believable as your sister's story." I paused at the bottom of the staircase and looked back at her. She was standing in the middle of our living room, looking lost and guilty and beautiful in that red dress that was definitely not meant for sister dinners. By the way, um, hey, I said, nice dress. Victor has good taste. Her sharp intake of breath told me everything I needed to know. As I lay in bed that night, listening to Dana pace around downstairs, probably trying to figure out how much I knew and how much damage control she needed to do, I found myself smiling for the first time in weeks. Not because I was happy, hell no, but because finally, I had some clarity. My marriage was over. Had been for a while, probably. But that didn't mean the game was. If Dana wanted to play in the big leagues with her fancy car dealer boyfriend, she was about to learn that this small-town mechanic had a few tricks up his oil-stained sleeves. After all, I'd spent 15 years learning how to take things apart and put them back together. Sometimes, though, the best fix is knowing when something's beyond repair and needs to be scrapped entirely. Guess I'll have to learn to fix a broken heart, or just break something else instead. The next morning, Dana was gone before I woke up, which was probably for the best, since I'd spent most of the night planning what I was going to say to her. None of it was particularly charitable. She left a note on the kitchen counter. Working late again tonight, don't wait up. Right, working late. With Victor and his magic hands, no doubt. I decided to do a little market research on my competition. After all, if you're going to lose your wife to another man, you might as well know what you're up against. So around lunchtime, I drove over to DeSantis Luxury Motors, a gleaming temple to automotive excess that took up half a city block. The showroom was exactly what you'd expect. Polished marble floors, spotless glass walls, and cars that cost more than most people make in 5 years. A blonde receptionist with teeth so white they could guide ships to shore greeted me with a smile that probably came with her employment contract. Welcome to DeSantis Luxury Motors. How can we help you today? Just browsing, I said, trying to look like someone who could afford a car that cost 6 figures. Thinking about upgrading from my pickup truck. Wonderful. Let me get someone to help you. Victor. And there he was, Victor DeSantis, in the flesh, walking toward me with the kind of confident swagger that comes from never having to worry about money or consequences. He was taller than he looked in Tony's photo, probably 6'2", with perfectly styled hair and a suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Victor DeSantis, he said, extending a hand with a grip that was just a little too firm, a little too long. What can I show you today? Pete, I replied, not bothering with my last name. I'm in the market for something reliable. Reliability is our middle name, he said with the kind of smooth confidence that probably worked wonders on lonely housewives. What's your budget range? Let's say sky's the limit. I lied. I just sold my business. Another lie, but hey, when in Rome. His eyes lit up like a kid on Christmas morning. In that case, let me show you something special. He led me over to a silver Porsche 911 that looked like it could break the sound barrier. The price tag made my eyes water, $180,000 for a car. I'd seen houses that cost less. This beauty just came in, Victor said, running his hand along the hood like he was petting a cat. 0 to 60 in 3.2 seconds, top speed of 191 miles per hour. She's a real head-turner. I bet she is, I said, thinking about how this guy was probably turning my wife's head on a regular basis. Mind if I look inside? Of course. Here, let me get the keys. While he was distracted, I took a quick look around his office, which was visible through glass walls at the back of the showroom. And there, hanging on the back of his chair like a trophy, was Dana's blue silk scarf. The one I'd bought her for our anniversary last year. The one she'd claimed she'd lost at work. Something cold and hard settled in my chest, like a ball bearing made of pure rage. But I kept my face neutral, kept playing the role of the interested customer while Victor showed me features I'd never use on a car I'd never buy. What do you think? He asked after his sales pitch. Impressive, I said. Really impressive. You must do well for yourself selling cars like this. Can't complain, he said with false modesty. Business is good, life is good. Got a beautiful girlfriend, nice house, everything a man could want. Girlfriend. Not wife, girlfriend. My wife was his girlfriend. Lucky you, I managed. Well, I need to think about it. Talk it over with the wife, you know how it is. Something flickered across his face. amusement, maybe, or contempt. Oh, absolutely. Happy wife, happy life, right? Something like that. I left the dealership with Victor's business card and a burning need to hit something very hard. Instead, I drove to Murphy's Tavern, the scene of the crime, and ordered a whiskey that cost more than I usually spend on lunch. That's where I ran into Marcy Peterson, one of Dana's work friends and the biggest gossip in the greater Cleveland metropolitan area. Marcy had never liked me much, thought Dana had married beneath her station, but she loved to talk, especially after a few drinks. "Pete," she said, sliding onto the bar stool next to me, with the enthusiasm of someone who'd already had a liquid lunch. "Fancy seeing you here. Isn't this where Dana comes for her business dinners?" "Is it?" I asked innocently, signaling the bartender for another round. "I wouldn't know. I don't usually frequent places where the appetizers cost more than a tank of gas." Marcy giggled, the sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. "Oh, you're so funny. Dana's always talking about your sense of humor. What else does Dana talk about?" "Oh, work stuff mostly. Her boss, her clients, that gorgeous car dealer she's been working with on the company fleet upgrade." My hand tightened around my glass. "Car dealer? Victor something, DeSantis, I think. Anyway, he's been helping them negotiate better rates for the company cars. Very hands-on approach, if you know what I mean." She winked like we were sharing some kind of inside joke. I bought Marcy 3 more drinks and listened to her spill every detail she knew about Dana's business relationship with Victor. How they'd been meeting regularly for months. How Dana had been glowing lately, like a woman in love. How Victor had apparently made some comments about Dana's husband being dead weight, and how she deserved better. By the time Marcy stumbled out to her Uber, I had a complete picture of my wife's affair, painted in vivid, humiliating detail by her own best friend. I drove home in a fog of rage and disbelief, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. When I pulled into my driveway, I saw Victor's silver Porsche parked across the street, partially hidden behind Mrs. Patterson's oak tree. The son of a witch was in my house, with my wife, probably in my bed. I sat in my truck for 10 minutes, watching the house I'd bought with 15 years of honest work. The house where I'd planned to grow old with the woman I loved and tried to decide what to do next. I could storm in there, catch them in the act, have it out right then and there. I could call a lawyer, start divorce proceedings, try to salvage some dignity from the wreckage. Or I could be smarter about it. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of Victor's car, parked outside my house, making sure to get the license plate and the timestamp. Then I drove to Tony's place and spent the evening planning my next move over a case of beer and a growing sense of cold, calculated fury. "You're taking this awfully well," Tony said around midnight when we were both thoroughly drunk and I'd outlined my preliminary strategy. "Am I?" I asked, surprised. "Because I feel like I'm about to explode." "Yeah, but it's a controlled explosion, like demolition work. Very precise, very calculated." He raised his beer in a mock toast. "Here's to precision demolition." "To precision demolition," I agreed. The next morning, I woke up with a hangover and a plan. Dana was already gone, another early morning at the office, no doubt, but she'd left her laptop open on the kitchen counter. The same laptop she'd been guarding like state secrets for the past few months. I'm not proud of what I did next, but desperate times call for morally questionable measures. I spent an hour going through her browser history, her email, her social media messages. What I found made my hangover feel like a gentle headache compared to the migraine of betrayal that followed. Months of messages between Dana and Victor. Photos I never wanted to see. Plans for weekend getaways I'd been told were work conferences. And worst of all, conversations about me. About how I was holding Dana back, how she deserved someone who could give her the finer things in life. How they were planning to be together permanently once she figured out how to handle the Pete situation. The Pete situation. Like I was a problem to be solved, a minor inconvenience in their grand romance. I printed everything, every message, every photo, every cruel joke at my expense. By the time I was done, I had a file thick enough to choke a horse and a plan that was starting to crystallize into something beautiful and terrible. Dana wanted to play games? Fine. But she was about to learn that this small-town mechanic knew a thing or two about taking things apart. And I was just getting started. The beauty of being a mechanic is that people underestimate you. They see the grease under your fingernails and the oil stains on your clothes and assume you're just some blue-collar guy who couldn't possibly outsmart them. Dana and Victor were about to learn how wrong that assumption could be. My first move was simple. I had a legitimate GPS tracking service for my shop, used to keep tabs on customer vehicles during test drives and deliveries. Perfectly legal, perfectly documented, and perfectly useful for tracking a certain silver Porsche that had been spending way too much time in my neighborhood. For 3 days, I watched Victor's movements like a hawk. His patterns were predictable. Dealership in the morning, lunch at expensive restaurants, afternoons at various client locations, and evenings, well, evenings were interesting. Tuesday night was Dana's apartment downtown, the one I didn't know she had until I followed the GPS signal there. Wednesday was a motel on the outskirts of town. Thursday was back at my house while I was supposedly working late. By Friday, I was ready to make my move. I parked across from the Sunset Motor Lodge, a place that had seen better decades, with Tony riding shotgun and a camera with a telephoto lens in my lap. We didn't have to wait long. At 6:30 p.m., Victor's Porsche pulled into the parking lot, followed 5 minutes later by Dana's Honda Civic. But they weren't alone. "Holy crap," Tony whispered as Marcy Peterson climbed out of Dana's passenger seat. "Is that Marcy?" I confirmed, watching through the camera lens as the three of them walked toward room 237 like they'd done this before. "Looks like Dana's been expanding her horizons." I took photos of everything: license plates, faces, room numbers, timestamps. When they came out 2 hours later looking disheveled and satisfied, I had enough evidence to end Dana's career and destroy Victor's reputation. But that was just the appetizer. Monday morning, I made an anonymous call to Meridian Financial's HR department, not Dana's department, but the one that handled executive misconduct. I didn't have to lie or exaggerate. I just provided facts, dates, and suggested they might want to look into their star HR executive's extracurricular activities. By Tuesday afternoon, Dana was suspended pending investigation. She came home that evening looking like she'd been hit by a truck, her usual composure cracked and bleeding around the edges. "They suspended me," she said without preamble, standing in the doorway of my workshop like she was afraid to come closer. "Sorry to hear that," I replied, not looking up from the carburetor I was rebuilding. "What for?" "They said there were allegations about inappropriate conduct. Someone sent them photos, Pete." "Photos of me with—" She trailed off, probably realizing that finishing that sentence would require admitting things she wasn't ready to admit. "With Victor?" I supplied helpfully. Her face went white. "How did you know about your boyfriend?" I finally looked at her, and she flinched at whatever she saw in my eyes. "Dana, sweetheart, I've known about Victor for weeks. The only question was how long you were going to keep lying to my face about it." She started to cry then. Big dramatic tears that might have moved me a month ago. Now they just made me tired. "It's not what you think," she said, which had to be the most cliched line in the cheater's handbook. "Really? Because I think you've been screwing a car salesman for the better part of 6 months while telling me you were working late. I think you rented an apartment downtown with money from our joint savings account. I think you and your friends have been having a grand old time laughing at the stupid mechanic who didn't know his wife was playing house with someone else." Each word hit her like a physical blow, and I found I didn't feel nearly as bad about that as I should have. "I never meant for it to happen," she whispered. "But it did happen, over and over and over again, in motels, in your secret apartment, in our bed while I was at work." I stood up, wiping my hands on a rag. "The question now is what we do about it. We could try counseling," she said desperately. "We could work through this. I'll end things with Victor. You'll what? Go back to pretending you love me while counting the days until you can run back to your sugar daddy? He's not a sugar daddy. Dana, the man drives a car that costs more than I make in 3 years. He owns a business, lives in a mansion, and can buy you pretty things without checking his bank balance first. What exactly would you call him?" She didn't have an answer for that. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued, my voice steady despite the rage burning in my chest. "You're going to pack your things and move in with Victor. I'm filing for divorce, and you're going to sign the papers without a fight. In exchange, I won't send the rest of those photos to your boss, your parents, or the local newspaper." "You wouldn't," she breathed. "Try me." That weekend was the Cleveland Fall Festival, a yearly tradition where the whole city turned out for food trucks, live music, and various forms of entertainment. This year's highlight was supposed to be a charity dunk tank featuring local celebrities and business leaders. Victor had volunteered. I bought a roll of tickets and got in line, watching as Victor held court from his perch above the water, making jokes and flirting with the crowd. He was in his element, the center of attention, probably thinking about how this kind of community involvement was good for business. When my turn came, I stepped up to the throwing line with a baseball in my hand and a microphone that the organizers had set up for trash talk. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, my voice carrying across the crowd, "we've got Victor DeSantis here, owner of DeSantis Luxury Motors, and I've got to say, the man knows his way around expensive rides." The crowd laughed, and Victor grinned, probably thinking this was just good-natured ribbing. "In fact," I continued, winding up for my throw, "Victor's been test driving my wife for months, and I hear she handles like a dream." The baseball hit the target dead center, and Victor plunged into the tank with a splash that was audible over the sudden, shocked silence of the crowd. When he surfaced, sputtering and furious, the silence broke into nervous laughter and scattered applause. Dana, who had been standing near the front of the crowd, turned and ran. Victor climbed out of the tank, dripping wet and humiliated, his expensive clothes ruined and his reputation taking a beating with every phone camera that had captured the moment. "Thanks for coming out, folks," I said into the microphone, dropping it and walking away as the crowd erupted into chaos behind me. That night, I found a note slipped under my door. "Back off or you'll lose more than your wife. V." I read it twice, then crumpled it up and threw it in the trash. Victor DeSantis had no idea who he was threatening, but he was about to find out. The game was just getting started, and I was finally beginning to enjoy myself. After 15 years of marriage, I'd forgotten what it felt like to be in control of my own life. Now, watching my wife's perfect world crumble around her, while her boyfriend learned that actions have consequences, I remembered why I'd fallen in love with the idea of justice in the first place. Some things once broken can't be fixed, but that doesn't mean you can't have a little fun with the pieces. The threatening note was the last straw. Up until that point, I'd been content to embarrass Victor and expose Dana's lies, but threatening me? That crossed a line that Victor was going to regret for the rest of his considerably shortened career in luxury car sales. I spent the next week preparing for what I privately called Operation Shutdown. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Destroy Victor's business reputation, expose the corruption I'd discovered in his dealings with the city, and leave both him and Dana with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the memories of what they'd thrown away. The first phase involved Victor's precious Porsche. As a licensed mechanic, I had access to various automotive security devices, including remote eliminate switches designed to prevent theft. Installing one in Victor's car during a chance encounter at a downtown parking garage was almost insultingly easy. The chance to use it came sooner than expected. I was driving home from a parts supplier when Victor's silver Porsche appeared in my rearview mirror, following way too close for comfort. At first, I thought it was coincidence, but when he followed me through 3 random turns and started flashing his lights, it became clear that Victor had decided to escalate our little conflict. He pulled alongside me at a red light, rolled down his window, and started shouting threats that would have made a sailor blush. Something about teaching me a lesson, showing me what happened to men who didn't know their place. The usual alpha male nonsense that guys like Victor fell back on when their egos got bruised. When the light turned green, he floored it, trying to cut me off in a display of automotive intimidation that might have worked if I hadn't been holding the remote eliminate switch in my left hand. I waited until he was in the middle of the intersection, right in front of Murphy's Tavern, where half the city's business elite were having lunch, before pressing the button. Victor's Porsche died instantly, rolling to a stop in the middle of the intersection while traffic backed up in all directions. The look on his face, confusion, then panic, then rage, was worth every hour I'd spent planning this moment. I pulled over and walked back to his car, where he was frantically trying to restart the engine, while a crowd of onlookers gathered on the sidewalk, many of them pulling out phones to record the spectacle. "Having some trouble, Victor?" I asked through his window. "You son of a witch," he snarled. "What did you do to my car?" "Me? I'm just a simple mechanic. What would I know about sophisticated German engineering?" I grinned at him through the glass. "Maybe you should call a tow truck. I hear DeSantis Motors has excellent customer service." The crowd was laughing now, and Victor's face was turning an interesting shade of purple. I walked back to my truck and drove away, leaving him to deal with the traffic jam, the crowd, and the inevitable questions about why his 180,000 Kamwishar had died in the middle of downtown Cleveland. But that was just the opening act. The real show came 3 days later, when, DeSantis Luxury Motors was hosting their annual Fall Luxury Showcase, a black tie event designed to show off their newest inventory to the city's wealthiest residents. Victor had been promoting it for weeks, calling it the biggest night of the year for his business. I crashed the party. Not literally, I'm not completely insane, but I did manage to hack into their sound system during Victor's opening speech. It wasn't particularly difficult. Their IT security was about as sophisticated as their moral standards. Victor was in the middle of talking about integrity in business and building relationships based on trust, when his words were suddenly replaced by audio from the motel room recordings I'd made the week before. Donna's voice, crystal clear through the showroom's premium sound system, describing in vivid detail exactly what she thought of her pathetic mechanic husband and how she couldn't wait to upgrade to a man who knows how to treat a woman. The silence in the showroom was deafening. 200 of Cleveland's most influential people stood frozen, champagne glasses halfway to their lips, as my wife's voice filled the air with confessions that would have made an adult movie star blush. Victor lunged for the sound system controls, but I'd locked them out remotely. The audio continued for another 30 seconds, just long enough for everyone to understand exactly what they were hearing, before cutting off abruptly. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, stepping out from behind a display car where I'd been hiding, "I'd like to thank you all for coming tonight. I'm Pete Hollander, and that was my wife Dana describing her relationship with your host, Victor DeSantis." The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs and nervous laughter. Victor looked like he wanted to homicide me with his bare hands, but he was trapped by the crowd and his own public image. "Now, I know what you're thinking," I continued, warming to my theme. "Why would a man humiliate himself like this in front of Cleveland's finest?" Well, the answer is simple. Because sometimes the truth needs witnesses. I pulled out a folder thick with documents and photos. You see, Victor here hasn't just been stealing wives. He's been stealing from the city, too. Overcharging for fleet vehicles, kickbacks to city officials, tax evasion, the works. I've got documentation going back 3 years, all of it obtained legally through public records requests and a little old-fashioned detective work. Victor tried to speak, but his voice came out as a croak. "You can't prove—" "Actually, I can." I handed copies of the documents to several people in the crowd, including Detective Carter, who I'd specifically invited for this occasion. "It's all there. Bank records, email communications, witness statements. Turns out Dana wasn't the only one keeping detailed records of her activities." The crowd was backing away from Victor now, like he had something contagious. His business partners, his clients, his friends, they were all looking at him with the kind of disgust usually reserved for child maltreaters and politicians. "The best part," I said, addressing Victor directly, "is that this is all completely legal. No theft, no fraud on my part, no illegal surveillance. Just good old-fashioned investigation and a willingness to follow the evidence wherever it led." Detective Carter stepped forward, his hand resting casually on his handcuffs. "Mr. DeSantis, I think we need to have a conversation." As the police led Victor away in handcuffs, I spotted Dana near the back of the crowd, her face white with shock and humiliation. She was wearing the red dress again, the one that had started this whole mess, but now it just made her look desperate and pathetic. "Pete," she said, pushing through the crowd toward me, "please, we can work this out. I'll do anything." "You already did everything," I replied. "With Victor, with Marcy, with whoever else you thought could give you a better life than the one we built together." I made a mistake. "No, Dana, you made a choice. Over and over again for months. You chose him over me, chose lies over truth, chose to throw away 15 years of marriage for a few nights with a criminal in an expensive suit." The crowd was dispersing now, but slowly, like people leaving the scene of a car accident. They were all staring at us, watching the final act of a marriage that had become public entertainment. "I loved you," Dana whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Maybe you did," I said. "But love isn't enough when it comes with betrayal, lies, and contempt. You wanted to upgrade your life? Congratulations. You're about to find out what it's like to start over with nothing." I walked away then, leaving her standing in the wreckage of Victor's business and her own reputation. Outside, Tony was waiting by my truck with a beer and a grin that could have lit up the city. "How'd it go?" he asked. "Better than expected," I replied, taking the beer and leaning against the truck. "Victor's going to prison, Dana's unemployed and unemployable, and I'm officially a free man. What's next?" I thought about it for a moment, watching the police cars pull away with Victor in the back seat. watching the crowd of Cleveland's elite scatter into the night with a story they'd be telling for years. Next, I'm going to go home, take a shower, and sleep for about 12 hours. After that, I'm thinking about expanding the shop, maybe hiring another mechanic. Turns out there's something to be said for the simple life. Tony raised his beer in a toast. To the simple life. To the simple life, I agreed. As we drove away from the wreckage of DeSantis Luxury Motors, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Not happiness exactly, that would come later, but the deep, satisfying peace that comes from knowing you've done what needed to be done. Dana had wanted to trade up, to leave behind the grease-stained mechanic for someone who could give her a more glamorous life. Instead, she'd traded everything for nothing. Now, she'd have to live with the consequences of that choice. Victor had thought he could take whatever he wanted, other men's wives, the city's money, respect he hadn't earned, without paying the price. Now he'd have plenty of time to think about that mistake from his prison cell. And me? I was exactly where I'd started. A small-town mechanic with oil under his fingernails and a shop full of broken things waiting to be fixed. The only difference was that now I knew the difference between things worth fixing and things that needed to be scrapped. Some lessons are worth learning, even when they cost you everything you thought you wanted.